What's up, people? Want to know something that I think is kind of stupid? I think people that kind of preach about science, to like just trust it or whatever, I hear people that say that a lot. I don't know, maybe people in the future watching this video, they're like, oh no, people are over that. But nowadays, a lot of people are like, oh, trust science, man. Like science, they think it's like this absolute thing. It's like some things are kinda absolute, like chemistry, physics, kind of, Who said it? I forget who said it, but there's a quote. He said, that all science except for physics is child's play. Um, I kind of agree with that because I've seen so many experimental setups that are just like stupid. And I'm like, how can you even consider that science? It's like, it really is child's play. It's like, it's stupid because there's just so many variables that aren't controlled. It's not a controlled setting. And it's and then obviously when you collect data from a shoddy experiment, and you analyze it, there's room for human interpretation. It's like, and it should be reviewed by people, like everybody. Like, I think people in considering the validity of science, any given experiment or whatever, any scientific conclusion, I think they should review completely the entire process that was used to get to a conclusion. And I remember I said that the other day, and some guy was like, oh man, like, you think everybody knows how to like comprehend science? It's like, dude, like, you can break it down pretty simple. Like, you know there's scientific communicators that exist today. You have Neil deGrasse Tyson, for instance, Richard Dawkins. um, you got people like them, who it's kind of their job to break science down into simpler terms to help people understand, and if it's good science, it shouldn't be hard to describe how um, a conclusion was come to. It's really not a hard concept. Um, it's not a hard thing to do. Give me 1 second here. Got notifications popping up on my phone. Um, so yeah, people that just say like believe the science, trust the science. I'm like, dude, like, it's not about trust. It's not about trust in experts, especially like you know. There's a lot of things in science. I remember I took an anthropology class at my local community college. Well, in the town I'm from, this is a different town, but the professor was talking about that Lucy, the missing link, in the fossil record, and he said that half of the anthropological scientific community um, agrees that that is enough evidence to consider that the actual missing link. It was like an incomplete fossil, the Lucy fossil, and then half of the field of anthropology says it's not enough, it's not sufficient. And that's just one example of something that is, maybe certain people in this world will promote it as some like, oh, missing link found, like absolute thing. It's like, that's very up for debate. Like, it just is. Um, there's a lot of things like that in science. A lot of things are not perfectly accurate. This goes back to what I was saying. Like anything but physics is really like, there's a lot. Like, let's look at Charles Darwin. He didn't even have an experiment. He just drew a conclusion from using his own common sense and looking at nature. And he's like, hey, these birds have long beaks over here, and then their food sources need long beaks, and over here they have short beaks, and they need the shorter beaks to crack nuts or whatever. And he just like put two and two together. He's like, oh, like, here's why. And then he kind of like figured it out with his own brain. He just literally observed nature and drew a conclusion from nature. There was no experiment. There was no uh it just he had good sense, and a lot of people, including myself, I consider that one of the most valuable scientific discoveries or realizations like of all time, because that, natural selection gave us, a sort of traction in understanding, the longer term processes of nature, and I just think it's like it's very insightful. And there was no experimental setup. There was no like, here's the experimental design and blah blah blah. It's like he just saw it. It was just like boom, common sense. And nowadays, if he just like claims something like that, you probably get a ton of people saying, "Oh, where's your PhD?" Like, like whatever. It's like a lot of people who say stuff like that, I feel like don't really understand the scientific method. I feel like a lot of those people, who say stuff like trust science or trust the experts, you need a PhD. If you have a PhD, your opinion's automatically more valid than somebody else's. It's like, dude, y'all don't even get it, bro. Science is all about reasoning. Science is a method of reasoning. Scientific experiments are designed to illustrate the process of reasoning, of logical deduction. And good experiments are set up in such a way that, the conclusions that are drawn are pretty obvious. You know what I mean? And that's experimental design is something. It's almost a type of communication. I would say it's like a way to show people, what you already kind of maybe understand, and draw up as a hypothesis. A lot of people, I think, already are convinced one way or another. Sometimes they might not be convinced themselves, and they'll set up an experimental. They'll set up an experiment, and with a certain experimental design to, figure out one way or another. Some people, I feel like they're already convinced, and they're just setting up an experiment to show other people what they are already convinced of. A lot of things, I feel like, if you just have good sense, you can kind of see things. You don't need to set up an experiment. You don't need, that type of controlled environment to put two and two together. Just like Charles Darwin didn't need an experiment to say, hey, long beaks, food source that requires long beaks, short beaks, food source that requires short beaks. He used common sense, and I think that was like, I personally, that to me is like one of the greatest insights of, scientific history, like one of the greatest discoveries in our scientific history. And I think there's a lot of things like that we can personally just like figure out. You don't need a PhD. You don't need a scientific design setup, whatever. It doesn't need to be like that. But there's some people that are just like, I feel like some people are like, so they want something to be absolute, but science is not absolute. I know, but here's some people are gonna say something like, well, some people try to say this. Like I said, the closest thing maybe is physics. Maybe there are immutable laws of physics, like with chemistry. Chemistry works the same every single time, pretty much, as far as we can tell. And whatever other physics, gravity, whatever, that I would say is the closest thing to, something that, is absolute. But beyond that, there's just other stuff. Is just there's so many factors that are involved that it's like literally impossible to create a controlled variable, for there to really be, a controlled variable to actually have a proper experimental design. I mean, you can set up experiments in certain ways where, it's kind of, you use your common sense again to just draw those conclusions. But there's plenty of times that I've seen, conclusions that have been drawn, where it seems pretty obvious to me that the people drawing the conclusions or who set up the experiments, like, just really were overlooking obvious factors that could have played a part in the outcomes, that they didn't even, take account of. Especially with like psychological experiments. Some of those are just like so obviously like there's human error, there's a human factor involved. Um, yeah, some of those are crazy, like so obvious, and then they want to like pretend like the surrounding circumstances don't affect the outcome, and then they want to just act like the outcome is some like impeccable thing, like it wasn't affected by all these surrounding circumstances. Just crazy, like, and they try to just act like it's like some absolute thing because that's what came out of this, subjective situation or whatnot. It's just like I've just seen that way too many times. It's just not absolute like I think some people want it to be, and that's what I think people want. People want there to be an absolute, and even that's why people I think have religion in the first place. And it's like instead of religion, they're just replacing it with science. They want answers, but they don't like that open ended, not having the answers feeling. Like they want like, well, science knows. If nobody else knows, science knows. If nobody else knows, God knows. It's like some people are afraid of that we don't know. I feel like that makes people uneasy. It's like causes a certain anxiety in certain people. Like I kind of like it. I'm like, cool. Like let's explore and see what's going. Let's figure it out ourselves. Gives me something to do. Gives me a task to keep myself busy or whatnot. Some people though, I don't think they like that. I think they want there to be something absolute, and instead of religion, instead of God, instead of creator, almighty, all-knowing, they say science is the all-knowing. It's like, no, it's not either. It's just still just people figuring stuff out. Yeah, it's just silly to me, like and some of it, like, it's not like some of the stuff that is clearly like just flawed. And that's the thing, people want to believe like science is flawless. It's not flawless, dude. There are so many experiments that are set up in such careless child's play. Just I forget who said that quote, but it is, dude. It's like a joke. Like anybody with good sense can review these experiments and say, look, it could obviously be A, B, C, D, E, F, G as a factor that's playing a part in these outcomes, but you're just choosing to say that it's this must be the conclusion that we draw. It's like it's just so bad. It's like it's not even rational. It's I don't. It's almost as stupid sometimes as like people's crazy made up stories. Like, oh, it's raining, must mean that God is crying or something. Like it's just like when you're missing all the variables and then just like jumping to a conclusion like that. It's like, it's really silly. And there are experiments that are set up like that, especially in psychology. I mean, psychology to me is like one of the obvious ones that I see a lot. Sometimes I see, the scientist, say, well, it could be this or it could be that led to this outcome. And then, they mention the other, variables that could have played a part in whatever outcome. So it's it's like a caveat with certain experiments, but at least they're doing that, and they're willing to admit that it's not a perfect experimental design. That there could be this factor, that factor, this factor, that factor that's playing a part in the outcome. But sometimes you got journalists that'll just ignore that and they'll say, oh look, this experiment was done, and then here's what they said, and just ignore all the caveats. And even the scientists will come up sometimes and be like, hey, we didn't like just say that, like. But journalists run with that stuff sometimes, and then they present it to common folk, if you want to call them that, just people who don't really get into that type of stuff, as some absolute thing. Like, oh, scientists said so, it must be true. It's like scientists say a lot of things. Scientists have opposing viewpoints, like, constantly. Like, there are a lot of things that are still undecided. Like, just because one scientist says this doesn't mean that all the other scientists are on the same note. And even if they are on the same note, you should understand why. You should not just say, oh, they all agree, so it must be right. It's like for instance, they just, like, I think they doubled the estimated size of the Milky Way galaxy. I think they said it was like, I don't remember what it was, like maybe 200,000 or 200, no, I forget. But they said like the number of stars, like they doubled their estimation. But a lot of scientists were all in agreement that, yeah, it was about that number. But then some came up, some new way of estimating that just literally made them double. So they were off by a factor of 2, like just because everybody's in agreement don't mean it's right. It's like there's still, you should understand the reasoning and understand what like the margin of error is. Science is not a perfect thing. It's not. It's not. Like the closest thing I would say that is absolute is physics. That's the closest thing, and that's why I wish I remember who said that quote, but they said, all other science besides physics is child's play, because there's so many factors involved in all of the other sciences that really, I've seen it. If you just review an experiment, and it depends obviously on what specific experimental setup it is or whatnot, whether there will be a bunch of different factors that could affect the outcomes, but I've seen it a lot. I'm not gonna pretend like I review every single experiment I come across. I'm not like, I don't know. I just I'm not gonna lie. I don't like review scientific studies every single day, but generally I see where there are flaws in the process, where there can be variables that are unaccounted for, or that are not like communicated to people, with certain experimental designs, that are kind of kept from the public. And certain things are promoted as if it is some absolute, but it's not. It's like even the scientists themselves, they get mad at like the press or whoever else. Maybe a scientific community will run with a concept when it's not even foolproof, and the scientists that maybe drew up the conclusion in the first place had caveats, but they're just being omitted, and it could be just a mess. Like, and I've seen it. People do this over and over and over, and it's just like, I like science. I love science. I love biology. I love astronomy. I love physics. I love all the technology that comes from different new insights that people have. I like where we are and where we're going as a species, with all this new technology. I think it's awesome how far we've come as a species in such a short amount of time. But a lot of people, I feel like, are putting unfounded trust in science. It's not a rational thing to do. It's kind of careless. It's just like, what do they say that, out of the frying pan and into the oven or whatnot. It's like, it's going from like religion and just like, oh yeah, faith and absolute idealism, to science is absolute. It's like, science is not absolute, dude. It's not. Certain things are pretty understood though, and we're pretty much all in agreement with certain things, but a lot of science is not all agreed upon, and it can't just be trusted like that. There's different parts of science. Some are like relatively established sectors, like physics, chemistry, stuff like that. Other things are kind of still up in the air, still being figured out, up for debate. Just because one scientist comes up with this new conclusion that they drew from this new experiment, whatever, does not mean it's absolute. Does not mean it's decided. It's really kind of their opinion up until a certain point of something really being figured out. And that's all science is a process of figuring stuff out. And there's like these edges of the scientific body of knowledge that are still being figured out. They're not absolute yet. Just because one scientist says this or whatever, it doesn't make it so. People need to understand that. And this matters. I mean, hopefully people in the future will understand this and be like, duh. But like right now, there's people who are just sitting here like, oh, you just don't trust science, because like they'll bring up, like I said, like a conclusion that one scientist drew up. It's like there's plenty of other scientists with different conclusions, opinions, whatever. It's because one scientist said it don't mean it's just absolute. Like, it's not a religion. It's not what science is. It's a process of figuring stuff out, and there's still things that are in the process of being figured out. Straight up. I feel like in the future I'm not gonna have to explain this. Like nobody's gonna have to explain this. It'll just be like understood. But we're in the process right now of getting people to understand it. So it has to be explained right now. It's just annoying. Like, I got to deal with that a lot. I hate when people, they're like, oh, you don't trust science? Oh, where's your PhD? If like you have like your own opinion, like if you, like you can, the process of science and experimental design is to make drawing conclusions easy, to make it like obvious. And anybody should be able to, anybody that knows how to reason should be able to look at an experimental design and see how, you know, scientists come to a conclusion. They should be able to review it and understand it. I mean, that's the process of science. A lot of people say stuff like, well, people need some, you know, kind of like base knowledge to understand certain other concepts. It's like, yeah, maybe in some cases, but like I said, you know, if you can break stuff down into an understandable form, uh, including the process of reasoning, you know, that so that, you know, laymen can understand how certain conclusions are come to. I mean, that's an important part of science. And it's really like, you know, I was gonna be honest, you know, scientific world usually figures stuff out, and it takes a little while for the rest of the world to catch up, you know. And there's things that, you know, scientists are probably working on right now, and, you know, they're up to speed on, you know, whatever field they're in. And you know, the rest of the world, you know, it's probably gonna take a little while to catch up before that all becomes like understood, including the process of, you know, how, you know, scientists, you know, have come to understand. You could even say no certain things. So, you know, I hope people understand what I'm saying here. I'm not like anti-science. That's another thing I always hear. It's like, dude, I freaking love science, dude. I'm not just saying that for, you know, whatever. And that's just so annoying. Like, some people just so kind of dumb about it. It's just annoying. I'm not anti-science. I love science. It's just I'm really just like critical of people who think you can trust everything anybody that calls himself a scientist, you know, has to say. You know, like everything that so-called scientists say is not factual. It's just not. There's a lot of stuff that is like opinion. It's like scientists have opinions. Just because you're a scientist doesn't mean you don't have an opinion. A lot of things are still in the process of being figured out, and there's a lot of opinions, you know, that are thrown out in the process of figuring stuff out. A lot of theories, a lot of hypotheses, you know. So yeah, definitely not anti-science, just kind of anti, you know, trusting every scientist as a absolute infallible expert, and trusting science as a whole as some type of absolute body of knowledge. You know, it's like there's things that we thought we knew that change all the time. It just is what it is. It's just, I guess it's just something at this time that I'm having to deal with. We're still at like a certain stage in like human development. You know, at least we're not back in like the old, like, if you think the Earth's not the center of the universe type thing, you're like blasphemous type. You know, like, well, at least we're not there. But yeah, we're still at a point where we're dealing with just, it's, I would call it like intellectual laziness, to be honest. I feel like a lot of people don't want to take the time to review experimental designs. They don't want to really take the time to understand stuff. I'm the type of person, I love doing that. Like, I think it's cool. Like, and really, I want to, like, I kind of suspect sometimes that people might be wrong, and no offense, but I kind of sometimes I think it'd be like, I don't know, it's like I don't know, I'm kind of competitive intellectually. So if I could find where somebody like messed up somewhere and I straighten them out, I'm like, all right, there you go. Like, I feel like I did something, you know. I feel like I can kind of like boast about that a little bit. But so I like to like look, review things, and proofread, kind of, you know, peer review or whatnot, just to see if I can poke holes in the theories or whatnot, see if it's really as foolproof as they kind of claim it is. And I think that's good for, you know, holding scientists accountable, for holding the scientific community as a whole accountable, or scientific body of knowledge, you know, really making sure it's foolproof, you know. I think that's what people should be doing. People should not just trust science. Like, no, you should test science. You should review science and try to understand how certain conclusions were come to, and see if it's really a rational process, to come to those conclusions. I'm telling you, a lot of people, they just want to trust science. It's like, y'all are out of the frying pan and into the oven or whatnot, whatever that phrase is. I might be saying that wrong. But it's the same thing. It's just blind trust, man. You're gullible. I mean, you're vulnerable to being lied to, manipulated, whatever, if you're just blindly trusting like that. I believe people should make choices for themselves, and let's say science is brought up in any capacity, you want to be able to understand that so you can make a rational choice regarding whatever it is that science might be involved in. Just trusting the experts. I mean, who's an expert? How do you know they're an expert? They just say they are, so you just trust that? How vulnerable are you to being taken advantage of if you just do that? Like, come on. I'm trying to like foolproof you as a person, put some defenses up for you who are obviously, just open for anything. It's just like, y'all are careless, And this really does come down to that kind of, like I like boxing. And one of the things you learn in boxing, when somebody, you sparring with somebody and they hit you somewhere you didn't know you had a hole, first thing you do, you figure out how to guard that spot because you don't want to get hit again, It's the same thing, if I can poke holes in the defense of certain theories or whatever, then there must be something wrong there, and it needs to be fixed, It needs to be reviewed. The whole situation, is vulnerable, and, me poking holes at it or exposing vulnerabilities is really just an attempt to get you to check yourself, figure out where you got holes in your defense and cover up or whatnot, so you're not vulnerable to manipulation or whatever. So it's a pretty simple concept. Yeah, I just felt kind of inspired to talk about that because I just saw something on Twitter. It was a picture, a sketch that Galileo drew when he looked at the moon through his telescope, and it was a cool little drawing. And that was back in the day when, if you didn't think that the Earth was the center of the universe, you were a God-hating heretic, like, dang, bro. So yeah, just I don't know, just kind of brought it to my mind a little bit. I like that we made progress from that, to be honest, and it's kind of ironic because I think what I'm really doing here is critiquing science. I feel like what I'm doing is, if anything, helping the scientific process. But there's still probably people that'll be like, "Oh, you're just anti-science." Whenever I say I don't trust every scientist and every opinion they have, they'll be like, "Oh, well, you just don't trust science. You're anti-science. Like, you're just as stupid as like." It's just dumb to say stuff like that. It's just dumb. That's just a dumb opinion or point of view. It's because I don't trust every scientist. Because, like maybe like, if anything, you could say, well, why don't you review their science? And if I choose not to and still choose to not trust scientists, then maybe you could call me stupid for, just not reviewing the science or writing something off without taking the time to review it. I mean, maybe that would make sense, but I don't know. It depends. It depends what we're talking about, but I just hear it a lot. I hear people say, trust science, trust scientists, trust the experts. Who do you know is an expert? Like a lot of people call themselves experts. How do you know which one's better? There's scientists in the same field that have differing opinions about different things. How do you know which one to trust? You should review the science yourself. I'm telling you. And it should be pretty easy. Ask them to explain the science, and then try to poke holes in it, like logically. I feel like I do that. I think other people do it too. Scientists themselves do that, and I think it should be, rigorously tested. All right, I think that's all I gotta say for now. We're coming up on 30 minutes, so I think it's a good little round number to end at. I'm gonna leave it at that. Talk to you later.